Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and tonight on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you Innocent Bystander by Craig Rice. This is copyright 1949 by Simon & Schuster and their Inner Sanctum Mystery imprint, which you can see there on the spine as well. So there's a lot of interesting things to say about Craig Rice. I think it's fair to say she's mostly forgotten and not read much, but she was very, very popular in her day. I have to tell you a little bit first about my own personal experiences with Craig Rice. I had read a bunch of her books when I was quite young. I want to say in my 20s. And they feature series characters, Helene and Jake Justus, and then John Malone, who get themselves involved in one wackadoo case after another. I think Craig Rice truly has an earned reputation as the queen or the champion of the screwball mystery. Because if you read these books of hers, they are all over the place. I mean, chases and antics and, mistaken identities, like a Shakespeare play, like one of the Shakespeare comedies. And just rollicking fun. People are constantly walking around, doing bizarre things. And, it all just leads to good fun. And I think this is why her books were so successful back in the day, because you could count on her for a good time. But there was a reason that I personally didn't care for those books, and it's that her three main characters are, to tell it like it is, drunks. They're drunk on every page, from page 1 through page 250 through the end. And the spectrum ranges from just a little tipsy and having the first drink of the day at 6 a.m. and being just so drunk that you think you're a butterfly and you're going to throw yourself off a building because you think you can fly. Or you're just passed out, drunk when important information is being passed around or important things are happening. And so, you just don't know what you would have known if you had been sober. And I think that if you have a family history of alcoholism or personal experience of alcoholism, friends or loved ones, you don't find drunkenness so funny, right? It's not, we can all laugh when a friend of ours, gets a little silly after having too many margaritas, at a party. That's one thing. But the early Craig Rice books almost felt to me like a celebration of drunkenness. And this is why I never liked the movie Arthur either. I don't find long-term drunkenness funny. And so I gave up on her because I realized she just wasn't right for me. So I did find out, though, fairly recently that she wrote some straight mystery/thrillers that were not in the comedic vein. And I thought, I'm going to go back to Craig Rice because I want to see what she is capable of when she is not writing screwball. I have to tell you, she was a fine writer. Reminded me a lot of Dorothy B. Hughes in terms of her pacing and mostly in terms of her ability to set and maintain a scene. This book takes place on a pier in Southern California in summertime. And it's the very traditional pier amusement park with rides and games and the Hall of Mirrors and a haunted house and, throw a ball into a goldfish bowl and win a free goldfish, which of course never happens because it's physically impossible, according to the law of physics, that is. And you are there. On every page, you see the sights, you smell the scents, you hear the noises, the atmosphere just washes over you and you feel like you are there. It's a remarkable performance in that way. But I think the best way for me to talk about the plot and also the things that I liked and admired about the book is to kind of combine elements of the plot with some of the interesting things that I think she did as a writer here. And what I would say is this is a book of dichotomies where there are pairs of characters and pairs of situations where neither of them is particularly good. Neither of the options that you're presented with is particularly good. You're almost always put in the position of rooting for the lesser of two evils, which is kind of funny, right? Throughout a book, you want to a lot of readers want to really grab onto a hero that they can admire. And you can find that to a certain extent here in the lead policeman, Art Smith. But even he is somewhat compromised. And so, since I mentioned Art Smith, let me talk about it now. But before I do that, let me just give you the setup. Chapter 1. Two men are on the Ferris wheel, on the piers, going round and round and round. In one carriage, there are two men, and one of them has a knife stuck in his back. So when the wheel disgorges its people, the man getting off that carriage says, "Oh, my friend wants to stay on and take another couple turns around. So here are some more tickets so you can stay on." Well, that then allows the man to get away and the murdered man to be found, discovered later on. And the man who was on the Ferris wheel with the dead body was Tony Webb, who is a thug. He's just a thug. He's recently out of San Quentin, looking for revenge, looking for money, looking for the hidden cache of money that he believes to exist somewhere near the pier. And he's enough of a punk, and he's cocky enough to not really leave the scene of the crime because he thinks, I have just as much a right to be here as anybody else. And he's also part of that community of the carnies, or the festival people, who run the ride and who are the barkers and, who run the show and who are their own subculture and who look out for each other and tip each other off. And, there's never going to be a worse guy anywhere on the pier than a policeman, right? No one is ever going to give a policeman the time of day, including the carnies, because they just think of the police as bad news. And in this book, you can see why. Because one of the many dichotomies is this difference between Art Smith, who's a by-the-book, long-time cop, and his younger partner, O'Mara. And O'Mara is, for lack of a better word, he's a complete bully. He's a violent bully and engages in police brutality. There's no other word for it. He beats suspects up. He kicks them. He hurts them badly in his quest to get information, all because he wants his boss's job. He wants Art Smith's job. And I've had some experience with this in my own life. A person who is trying to get someone else's job actively, that's a sign of a major moral deficit. I mean, I've witnessed it several times, not always with respect to myself. Watch out for those kind of people because they are sociopaths. So instead of being partners, O'Mara and Smith almost become rivals in terms of trying to figure out what happened, who the murderer is, they think they know who the murderer is. They think it's Tony Webb. But how do they get information that will let them legally arrest him and get him convicted and thrown back in jail? So where things get a little interesting, and this is the cause of, or the initiating incident that takes the plot off and running, is that while the man on the Ferris wheel, an underground businessman, shall we say, named McGurn. While he's getting murdered, there is a young woman on the pier, and she is being sketched by an artist. You know, you pay, I mean, back in those days, they paid 50 cents. Now you'd probably pay $10 or $20. But this is how the man makes his living. He's always kind of perpetually tipsy or whatever, but this is how he ekes out a living. And the way they are angled, this woman whose name is Ellen, she has kind of a straight line of vision to the Ferris wheel. And what everybody is trying to figure out is whether Ellen actually saw the murder happen or if she did not see anything. She says she did not see anything, but nobody quite believes her. And there's reason for that, because she's a little slippery. She tells her origin story differently to 3 different people, you know, so you really don't know who she is or really where she came from or if she has an agenda, why she's on the pier, what she's doing there. You don't know. And amidst all of this, you have pretty much every lead male character in the book kind of falling in love with her. You've got the good guy cop, Art Smith, falling for her. You've got O'Mara falling for her. You've got Tony Webb falling for her. And the Tony Webb Ellen situation is another interesting dichotomy, because he can't figure out whether he wants to love her and walk arm in arm down the aisle into wedded bliss with her, or whether he wants to kill her. Because if she did indeed see him stabbing the victim and she talks about it, I mean, he's going to be back in San Quentin or in the electric chair in no time flat. So he's perpetually walking this kind of very uncomfortable line between, do I love this woman, but should I at any moment be prepared to kill her, to shut her up? So a lot of what drives the plot in this book is the search for truth and these men's pursuit of Ellen, and you know, who's going to win? Will any of the men win her heart, or will something else happen? And that's another interesting aspect of this book. So how do I explain this? So I was surprised for much of the book that Craig Rice, who clearly a successful, independent woman, would write a female character who was such a doormat. So Ellen is portrayed very sensuously throughout the book. You know, her beautiful figure is always emphasized in her beautiful skin and her luscious rosebud lips. I mean, she is really made out to be the kind of woman that no man can resist. And yet, you know, she's curiously passive, and she's kind of working part-time at the carnival, but then she takes a job taking care of a hotel owner's kids or whatever. So she's really slippery. And the men in this book are violent with her. I mean, there's no other way to say it. They slap her around, they choke her, they whack her to the floor, and she takes it. You know, and I felt like, why? I would almost think that Craig Rice, you know, as a woman writer, would have a stronger heroine, or have someone who's not quite so much of a doormat. But great novelist, right? So as you read through the book, though, you come to understand more and more about what makes Ellen tick. There's a very interesting set piece in here where on the pier there's a large-scale diorama with sort of animatronic figures, and you could put a dime in there. And it's almost like a King Kong type thing, where there's this huge gorilla. He's got one naked, writhing lady in one hand, and he's reaching into the trees to grab another mostly naked woman to grab her too. So it's a sign of, like female possession, male abduction of women as playthings for men. And when I got to that scene, I started to realize, okay, Craig kind of knows she's making a point about this. There's a feminist perspective here that's going on. And as you get to the conclusion, you see what Craig Rice has done in terms of her female characterization. And you think, you go, Craig, because she really did an interesting and very well structured job of taking the reader on a journey from one perception about Ellen and the characters surrounding her to other perceptions, right? So there are these great turnabouts where the good turn out to be maybe not so good and the evil turn out to be maybe not so evil. There are more dichotomies of Tony Webb is, a punk and he's mouthy, but yet there are two bigger punks, they call them the New York Hoods, who are at the pier looking for Tony because they think Tony has stolen money from their employer. So it's almost like you're put in the position of, which hoodlums do you want to win? None of them are particularly moral, or none of them, you're not really particularly rooting for any of them, because like Tony Webb, you could say, okay, well, maybe he was falsely imprisoned in Sing Sing, maybe he was set up. But when you see him knocking around poor Ellen and, plotting to kill her if he has to, he's not some big pussycat. He is a criminal with a criminal mind and criminal intent. And yet somehow Craig makes him seem to be the better choice than the New York hoodlums, who are it's almost like corporate America versus the little guy. You want, with New York hoods being corporate America and the little guy being, this shady dude who, worked confidence games at the pier. Another thing that Craig Rice did really, really well here, and she totally borrowed from Agatha Christie's playbook, is in terms of her use of assumptions. So one of the things that Agatha did, among many, is allowing readers to proceed through the book with a set of assumptions that she's allowed you to have and even encouraged you to have, until you get to the end and you realize your assumptions were wrong, baby. You were assuming the wrong thing. And Agatha made you assume the wrong thing. There's a good amount of that going on here too. And to me, being able to pull that off and pull off those sorts of surprises is really the sign of a fine plotter and a good, mysterious mind. I'm working on a writing book now, and the authors there talk a lot about, in the reader's experience, whenever you read anything, usually nonfiction, but not always, you want to surface the writer's assumptions, right? The writer is coming in assuming that you understand or believe certain things that may not be true, and if you argue with the assumptions, you may find that their argument completely falls apart. But I think we mystery readers, even though we've been fooled many times before, we still get led into the trap of false assumptions that are then turned upside down in a conclusion that is very satisfying. And that is what happens here. So I was very pleased to have read this book. I'm glad I gave Craig Rice another chance. It showed what she could do. And I can recommend the book if you like all these aspects that I'm talking about. I'll close by telling you a couple funny anecdotes about Craig Rice that I just happen to have picked up over the years. One is that, this isn't so much an anecdote, but that Craig Rice was featured on the cover of Time magazine. And you can look it up on the web. It's sort of Craig Rice in the foreground with kind of this phantomy, mysterious person with a poison bottle or scissors or something looming behind her. So, a woman writer on the cover of Time magazine in the 1940s. That shows how much respect she had, I think, in the world. Because, I hate to say it, but we all know it's true that people think, well, there's literature and then there's mysteries, right? Which, you can't really take seriously because they're not real literature. We know the truth about that, but there's that misperception out there. Another interesting thing about Craig Rice is that it was widely believed for a long time that she ghost wrote a mystery novel for Gypsy Rose Lee, the stripper, called The G-String Murders. And I think that speculation was fueled by the fact that the dedication of that book says something like, to Craig Rice, without whom this book could not have been written, which, is often a dead giveaway to a ghostwriter. But apparently Gypsy Rose Lee said no, she was indeed the writer of that book. And so it's not true that Craig Rice wrote that book for her. I think that I actually have a copy of the book. I haven't read it. I will one of these days and then review it here. But I guess they were friends, and there was enough stylistic similarities that people could believe that Craig Rice actually wrote the book for Gypsy Rose Lee. Finally, and this is, I think, my favorite story about Craig Rice, is she was married a handful of times, and in one of her weddings, she was carrying a leather-bound volume under her arm. She walked down the aisle and she took her vows, and her friends looked at her and thought, why is Georgiana here? Her real name, Georgiana. Did I mention this earlier in the video? I can't remember. Her real name was Georgiana Craig, and she took Craig Rice as a pseudonym. But why is Georgiana all of a sudden finding religion and carrying the Bible with her? It seemed like kind of a 180 for Craigie here. But it turned, and everyone assumed it was a Bible, but it turned out that Craig had just had a copy of one of her own books clad in leather so that she could have it with her at her wedding. Which, we know writers can be self-centered. That's probably one of the top 10 self-centered writer stories that I can think of. And there are many. But I just get the hugest kick out of that story. So let me close by showing you the cover again, which I really like, kind of minimalist, the Ferris wheel here. Note the stand of the Ferris wheel is the letter A. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's saying, like, this book gets an A. This book by Craig Rice gets an A. And it also, in a way, I think, is a precursor of modern book jackets, particularly in nonfiction, but sometimes in fiction, where there's kind of a central image in the center of the book with the writer's name above and the title below, or vice versa. Like, instead of there being a lot going on in today's covers, there is often, there's so many book covers, it's hard to generalize, but, at the new releases stand at Barnes & Noble, you're going to see a certain type of cover, a little more sophisticated than this, but I think that follows this general template, which I like. And of course, the merry-go-round, the colors, it looks like a little bit of a color wheel. I think it's a really nice, it's a nice jacket, and it sent the signal to the readership that this is going to be different from her series books with her series characters, because those books had kind of, comedic, cartoonish, Hogarth-like illustrations of people just drunk and rowdy and, falling all over themselves and falling all over the place. So Polish did a nice job of setting expectations for this book to say this is not that kind of book. And then, of course, on the back cover, there are some just nice blurbs for one of Craig Rice's earlier novels. So check out Craig Rice. I like I said, even though the series books weren't quite my cup of tea, I think if you like a comedic mystery and someone who can be truly funny without trying too hard, because that's painful, right? Someone who's like, I'm funny, and then you read their book and you just cringe throughout because you think you're not funny. You think you are, but you're not. But Craig Rice was truly a funny writer, and so if you're looking for a comedic mystery, check her out, see what you think. This book, Innocent Bystander is not funny. There's no humor whatsoever, which also made me think, did she set out with a challenge to herself to be able to see, can I get out of my rut, or can I get out of what my readers expected of me and do something much more in the mainstream of the genre and get good reviews and be respected and have my writer and have my readers and reviewers think highly of the book. And I checked, the book got starred reviews all over the place. Contemporary readers really were wowed by it. And so it just goes to show that, in my opinion, but of course, all these videos are my opinion from start to finish, the best comedy really has underlying messages that come through loud and clear. A modern humorist who I absolutely love is Christopher Buckley. If you've ever read, he's not necessarily a mystery writer. He wrote Thank You for Smoking. I mean, that dude is just a hoot from the word go. And it's come so naturally to him. He's just a hilarious writer with, it appears to be, almost no effort. And I think that Craig Rice had that gift as well. So I've gone on long enough. Thank you for watching. And please, as always, feel free to leave comments below. Thanks. Good night.